So let me move to the last our speaker, Father Cyril Havalon from Loyola Marymount University, and his presentation title is "The Ukrainian Cause: Panorthodox and Ecumenical Implications." Father Cyril, please start.
Father Cyril, you're...
Yeah. Thank you so much, Sanami. Thank you for your introduction and the invitation. Thank you, the speakers. I'm going to, in my presentation, certainly I will resonate with the previous presentations, and I'll continue. We'll build on them somehow. I will particularly focus on 2 points, which are encoded in the title of my presentation. One point is how granting autocephaly by the Ecumenical Patriarchate to the Orthodox Church of Ukraine, OCU to be abbreviated, affected the inter-Orthodox relations. And the second point is how the same granting of autocephaly affected the inter-Christian relations, the ecumenical dimension of our church life. Indeed, the inter-Orthodox relations have been tested by the action of the Ecumenical Patriarchate and the reaction from some other churches led by the Patriarchate of Moscow. As it was mentioned in the previous presentations, especially the presentation of Professor Vassiliadis, the reaction of the Moscow Patriarchate and its subsidiaries, autonomous subsidiaries such as the Russian Orthodox Church outside Russia, RUKOR, or the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of the Moscow Patriarchate, which, well, pretend to be autonomous, and yet they move in the line with the Moscow Patriarchate, and they all broke relations with the churches which had recognized the Orthodox Church of Ukraine. Those churches have been mentioned, like, well, of course, the Ecumenical Patriarchate, the Patriarchate of Alexandria, the Church of Cyprus, and some dioceses of the Church of Greece. It was a tricky decision by the Moscow Patriarchate how to deal with the Church of Greece. They apparently did not want to alienate those bishops in the Church of Greece who were against the recognition, who opposed the Archbishop of Athens, who took a decision, and then that decision was confirmed by the majority of the council, of the Bishops' Council. And, well, the attitude of Moscow to the Church of Greece is more nuanced. So they try to essentially to divide the Church of Greece into 2 parts and to alienate those parts from each other. This kind of reaction gave some observers an opportunity, or I don't know, a chance to speak about a schism, which was already mentioned in the presentation of Professor Vassiliadis. I think, in my humble opinion, these kind of statements, like of a schism, and I know that some colleagues of us, they use this language of a schism. I think it's not a helpful language, and moreover, it corroborates the narrative that Moscow wants to promote. It says like this, that look, there is a schism, therefore Constantinople and other churches must pull back, because there is a threat of schism. So this language of schism was designed exactly to, to make the churches to pull back from the recognition of the autocephalous church. I believe that, in fact, it is not a schism. I call it a scratch, on the surface of the inter-Orthodox relations. It's not even a crack, or not even, a divide. It's not a divide, certainly. Because, in my opinion, a schism requires reciprocity. When both parties involved in the schism break relations with one another, and both parties essentially believe in a schism. So the schism, in order to exist, needs to be believed in needs to be accepted by both parties. And this was the case in many other schisms, which we know. Like, for instance, this was the case with the schism of the Rokor, Russian Church outside Russia, when the Rokor did not even recognize the baptisms which had been made in the Moscow Patriarchate. And the Moscow Patriarchate, did not recognize the consecrations and ordinations of priests made in the Rokor, within the Rokor. But, well, of course, when they decided to join up, they just, dropped all those practices, and they recognized the baptism and the, consecrations and ordinations and so forth. But before that, both parties firmly believed that it is a schism, and it was a schism. Or take the case of the Catholic Church, like the Lefebvrean schism, the schism caused by the Archbishop Lefebvre. That part, the kind of very radically conservative party within the Catholic Church that followed Archbishop Lefebvre, did not recognize, the decisions of Rome and the hierarchy of the Catholic Church, and there was a reciprocity in the attitude of the official Rome to that schism. Or take the Orthodox-Catholic relations. Only after, I believe that the schism between the Orthodox and the Catholics was accomplished only in the 18th century, when the two churches, Constantinople and Moscow, took a decision not to recognize the sacraments of each other. And that was the final point in the schism between the East and the West. But it required a mutual kind of recognition of the state of being divided. This is not the case between Moscow and Constantinople. We just need to stop talking about the schism, because, yes, Moscow does not allow its priests and bishops to concelebrate with the priests and bishops of the Ecumenical Patriarchate, or does not allow its faithful to go to the churches and to take communion in the Ecumenical Patriarchate. But and at the same time, the Ecumenical Patriarchate welcomes everyone to join and to concelebrate and to take communion. Well, being a priest of the Moscow Patriarchate, I concelebrate quite openly with the Ecumenical Patriarchate, even with the Church of Ukraine, the Autocephaly Church of Ukraine, without being punished. It means that Moscow more pretends to be tough on its decisions than it is in fact. That's why even Moscow does not completely believe in the schism. Why should we believe in the schism? Why should we recognize the schism? I think it's not wise. So that's why when what we are dealing with is not a schism, as I said, it's more like a bluff. And it is also an instrumentalization of the rhetoric of the schism as a means of blackmailing and intimidation. As I said, as I mentioned, Moscow has produced this rhetoric of schism exactly in order to push back Constantinople and other churches, and to disencourage other churches from recognizing the Autocephaly Church of Ukraine. And this policy works, it should be said. My personal experience and my personal observation is that the majority, well, almost every church, a local church in the Orthodox world, is nowadays prepared to recognize the Autocephaly Church of Ukraine. There are maybe only a couple of churches that are convinced that there are no reasons, good reasons to recognize the Autocephaly Church. Maybe it's a Polish church, which is very strange because, well, the Autocephaly of the Ukrainian Church is the common basis for the Autocephaly of the Polish Church. So essentially, by denying the Autocephaly of the Ukrainian Church, the Polish Church, shoots in its own foot, and it doesn't make sense. and maybe the Orthodox Church of the Czech lands in Slovakia also is quite convinced, at least some people in the leadership of the church, convinced that there are no reasons to recognize the Ukrainian church. Other churches, in my opinion, and according to my observations, are pretty much ready to recognize the Autocephaly Church of Ukraine, but they are scared. They don't want to proceed to that step because they have been, intimidated, blackmailed, exactly by the rhetoric of the schism. They're told, do you want to enhance the schism? Do you want to contribute to the schism? Then go and recognize the Autocephaly Church. If you want to preserve the Panorthodox unity, just don't do that. Which is very strange, as if those churches cause the divisions, but they don't cause the divisions. It's Moscow which tries to say, we will disrupt the communion. We will blast the unity of the Orthodox Church if you go and recognize. If you don't want us to blast the unity, then don't recognize. And this kind of rhetoric works pretty well, I should say. And the churches, the process of the recognition of the Autocephaly Church has been stumbled and does not proceed, as we know now. But internally, I think, within themselves, the local churches, the majority of the local churches, I believe they've grown to the decision of recognizing the Autocephaly Church the moment when the threat to the Pan-Orthodox unity is eliminated. I believe that Moscow combines two policies, the policy of intimidation and the policy of encouragement, so to say, the policy of stick and carrot. So the rhetoric of schism is essentially a policy of a stick, and there is also a policy of a carrot. When the churches who do not proceed to recognize the Autocephaly Church, or the churches who do not side with the Ecumenical Patriarchate, they're encouraged to do so in different ways, by different means. Some of those means are quite legit, like, for instance, the famous prize distributed by the International Foundation for the Unity of Orthodox Christian Nations. In Russian, it is Международный общественный фонд единства православных народов, which is a kind of it's like a wallet from which they take money and give to that money to the primates of the church. So those primates they want to entice to certain decisions, or they help to construct or reconstruct churches and cathedrals, like it was the case in Serbia. Or sometimes those means are not quite legitimate, like if they just they can just bring bags of cash and distribute that cash among people, among the leaders. So they use essentially different ways, different carrots. They bring different carrots. Some of them are pretty much rotten. Some of them are pretty much kind of legitimate, but still they are carrots. And I believe that these two policies of a stick and a carrot concurs with the policies of the Kremlin in dealing in behaving on the international arena, because the Kremlin also uses sticks and carrots to force other countries to comply with its political agendas. Stick can be all sorts of threats, including like cyber attacks or steering waves of immigration in Europe and so forth. All sorts of all what we call hybrid attacks or war, whatever. Carrots are also bribes. They also offer very lucrative positions for the retiring European leaders in the Russian state corporations. And well, we will learn a lot about the ways of bribing, European establishment by Russians in some future. We will see, or even Americans. The American politicians. So those are very similar approaches, similar policies. And I believe that the Kremlin and the church, Russian church have very similar rationales for these kind of policies. The rationale for the church and for the Kremlin is essentially to keep Ukraine under the political influence. It's not that really the Russian church needs Ukraine. I don't believe it does need Ukraine. I mean, in terms of communities or money, whatever. Sometimes people in Ukraine, they say, well, you see, Russia, the Russian church desperately needs Ukraine because Ukraine constitutes 1/3 of, of the communities. Well, maybe it's somewhere on the back of the heads to keep those numbers high, arithmetical kind of importance of the church, but they don't get money from Ukraine. They don't get resources. They are afraid of the Ukrainian bishops who participate in councils and they vote, and they elect the primates of the Russian church, and they are beyond the control of the Russian's political institutions that control the church. That's why Ukraine is an unpredictable part of the Russian church, and the Russian church is afraid of that part. But Ukraine certainly has a symbolic meaning and importance for Russia. It is important for the state ideology of the Kremlin, and the church tries to boost this ideology and also tries to keep, for this reason, tries to keep Ukraine under its influence. So that's how the inter-Orthodox relations have become a hostage to this ideology, essentially, to the importance of this ideology for both the Kremlin and the church. The same hostage has become the ecumenical movement, and that is the second point. I'll try to be brief on this point. The ecumenical relations, which have become a hostage of the same policies and rationales of the Russian church and the Kremlin. The Russian church has effectively blocked the bilateral Panorthodox dialogues. Bilateral dialogues are the main ecumenical instruments. Usually they work like this, that each local church sends its representatives to bilateral dialogues with other confessional groups. Like there are bilateral dialogues between the Orthodox and the Catholic, Orthodox and the Lutherans, Orthodox and the Anglicans. And to each of those dialogues, each church sends its representatives. Then, depending on what confession is on the other side, they send either, centrally, like the Archbishop of Canterbury sends his own appointees to the Anglican dialogue, or the Catholic Church decides, the Roman Curia decides who will represent the Catholic Church in the dialogue and so forth. But from the Orthodox side, it is important that each church participates through its representatives. And it's important that all churches send their representatives, and all representatives participate in the dialogues. And after the Russian church broke relations with the Ecumenical Patriarchate and some other churches, they issued a decision that the Russian church will not participate in the events, in the fora, with the participation of the representatives of the Ecumenical Patriarchate, which technically means that the Russian church refused to send its representatives to each bilateral dialogue, given that all those dialogues are co-chaired by the representatives of the Ecumenical Patriarchate. It means that all the bilateral dialogues are blocked effectively, and they cannot proceed because, you can adopt a decision in such a dialogue, but without the signature of the Russian church or some other churches, it doesn't make sense. So it's just a piece of paper. So they essentially they inflated, as it were, the ecumenical dialogues and made them just conferences, not really something that is important for the ecumenical movement. So that was also a way of exercising a pressure on the churches and on the ecumenical partners of the Orthodox churches. Particularly, that was a pressure for Rome, I think, and Rome somehow yielded to this pressure for the sake of the ecumenical dialogue. Also, some other ecumenical organizations like the World Council of Churches also yielded to this pressure. Like, for instance, the Orthodox Church of Ukraine has all rights to be a part of the World Council of Churches, according to the statutes of the of the World Council of Churches. And this is not happening. As the leaders of the WCC explained to me, it's just because of the position of the Russian Church. So essentially, the Russian Church blackmails and forces the WCC to decline any request from the even from the Ecumenical Patriarchate and also from the Orthodox Church of Ukraine for the membership in this organization. Otherwise, they are very happy, to receive new members, because they also operate with numbers. They're proud that we have so many member churches and so forth. But they say no to a church which can increase their membership, which is quite a surprise, and it's contrary to the kind of ideology of the WCC. And the last points I wanted to say is that one may have an impression that the withdrawal of the Russian Church from the ecumenical dialogues is caused by the Ukrainian situation. I think it is not. We should, and in the church, in understanding the church policies as well as in understanding any sort of policy, it is important to distinguish between reasons and pretexts, causes and excuses. So I believe the Ukraine situation is not a reason, is not a cause of the Russian withdrawal from the ecumenical activities. It's a pretext. It's an excuse, because the reasons they lay deeper, and there are two major reasons, I believe. One reason is the policy towards safe isolation and autarkization of the Russian politics globally, when the Russian politicians essentially believe that the world needs Russia, but Russia doesn't need the world. And that's why everyone has to comply, with the Russian policies, but Russia has not to comply with any international, regulation or rule. It's a very delusional, of course, belief, but unfortunately, it dominates somehow Russian politics. And unfortunately, the same kind of mentality has affected the church leadership. They also believe that the Orthodox world needs the Russian church, but the Russian church doesn't need the rest of the Orthodox world. And the ecumenical, organizations and the ecumenical world needs the Russian church, but not the other way around. So this is one thing. This policy towards self-isolation and to making themselves important, when everyone toes around this enfant terrible who tries to promote his kind of mood. It's a very moody baby, and which cries and demands that everyone dances around this baby. But it's a childish behavior. It's a childish attitude, of course. And unfortunately, a lot of people in the ecumenical organizations or the churches, begin dancing around this and accept the rules imposed upon them. Another important reason why the Russian church withdraws from the ecumenical movement is a growth of fundamentalism within the church. Originally, fundamentalism, as in any church, it was on the margins of the church life, and it was normally contained by the leadership. The leadership was not led by the fundamentalistic groups. The present leadership of the Russian church, I think, tried to manipulate the fundamentalistic groups, and it turned out that it lost control over the fundamentalistic groups, and the fundamentalistic groups now, somehow control the leadership of the church, even though there are no fundamentalists in the leadership of the Russian church. And I'm talking about the Moscow Patriarchate, like in Ukraine, in the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. Well, the leadership is fundamentalistic, pretty much. But in the Moscow Patriarchate, the leadership is very much kind of open-minded, regardless of everything. And still, they have to comply with the demands of the fundamentalist groups. That is another reason why the leadership of the Russian church essentially decided to sacrifice the ecumenical commitments of the church to the fundamentalistic demands, to the fundamentalist groups, because ecumenism for the fundamentalists is the arch heresy, is the worst thing you can imagine. That's why They're very much afraid of ecumenism, and they impose this kind of attitude upon the leadership of the church. All this does not mean that we have to the rest of the Christian community, the churches or the ecumenical groups have to yield to all those demands and to play those games, childish games. It means, however, that we need to be patient. We need to be wise. We should not exclude, we should not reject this kind of behavior just because it is childish. Maybe something therapeutical, something. Well, we have to something pedagogical needs to be applied to this kind of behavior. The rest of the churches need to be adult, need to be grown up, need to be wise to deal with this kind of behavior. And that's something we could discuss maybe later. That's my presentation. Maybe I took a longer time than I expected. Thank you for your attention.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for Cyril, for your fascinating presentation. And thanks to your punctuality,